There are only around 80 surviving paintings by Caravaggio, but among all of them, there is one that hides a secret so disturbing, so intimate, that it permanently changes how we understand the artist behind the canvas. This painting is not only Caravaggio's largest known work, it is also the only painting he ever chose to sign, but he did not sign it with confidence. He did not sign it with pride. He signed it with blood. For centuries, no one noticed. The signature remained invisible, concealed within the violence of the scene itself. It was only during a careful restoration that historians discovered something shocking. Caravaggio's name subtly written into the blood flowing from the wound of St. John the Baptist, yet not on the frame, not in the corner, but inside the act of execution itself. It was as if the artist fused his own identity with the moment of death, as if he wanted to be remembered, not as an observer, but as someone personally implicated in the violence. In today's video, Hidden Intellects explores the beheading of St. John the Baptist, a painting that goes far beyond religious storytelling. This is a confession, a desperate plea for redemption, and a psychological mirror of Caravaggio's own life as a hunted man. This is not just a masterpiece. It is a crime scene, a silent testimony, and a final gamble for freedom. When Caravaggio arrived in Malta, he was not entering a cultural capital. He was entering a fortress. At the beginning of the 17th century, Malta was one of the most heavily militarized places in Europe. The island was ruled entirely by the Knights of St. John, an ancient crusading order formed during the medieval wars of religion. These were not symbolic knights. They were soldiers, administrators, judges, and executioners. Malta functioned less like a city-state and more like a permanent military camp. Stone walls, prisons, armories, and churches dominated the landscape. Every aspect of life was governed by discipline, obedience, and fear. At the center of this system stood the Grand Master. His authority was absolute. He controlled the courts. He controlled the prisons. He controlled life and death. There were no appeals, no negotiations. Once a judgment was delivered, it was final. This culture of uncompromising justice shaped everything on the island, including its art. Ironically, this environment of violence and control made Malta the perfect refuge for a man like Caravaggio. By 1607, Caravaggio was one of the most famous painters in Europe, but he was also one of the most dangerous men to be around. In Rome, he had lived a life of constant conflict, brawls, arrests, duels. That life finally caught up with him when he killed Ranuccio Tomasoni during an illegal duel. Dueling was forbidden in the Papal States. The punishment was death. Caravaggio fled Rome as a condemned man. He was sentenced in absentia, meaning anyone could legally kill him. All that was required was proof. His severed head. Every shadow was a threat. Every stranger was a potential executioner. Caravaggio's survival now depended entirely on political protection. This is where Malta enters the story. The Grand Master of the Knights, Olaf de Wignacourt, immediately recognized the opportunity. Malta was powerful, but culturally isolated. It lacked prestige. It lacked influence in the artistic world. Caravaggio could change that. By bringing Europe's most notorious painter to the island, Wignacourt could transform Malta's image. A military outpost could become a cultural stronghold. A remote island could become a destination. For Caravaggio, the deal was even more desperate. If he could become a knight, he would gain status that extended beyond Malta. Knighthood offered honor, protection, and most importantly, a possible path to papal forgiveness. The plan was simple and dangerous. Caravaggio would serve the knights through his art. In return, the knights would protect him. And if everything went perfectly, Rome might one day pardon him. But Malta was not a place of mercy. It was a place of rules. And once those rules were broken, There was no escape. This uneasy alliance between a violent artist and a violent institution would soon be tested, and it would all come down to one painting. At first glance, the beheading of St. John the Baptist looks like a traditional religious scene, but the longer you look, the more disturbing it becomes. This is not a painting about faith. It is a painting about power. There is no divine presence here. No angel descending from the heavens. No gesture of mercy. No sign that justice will ever arrive. Instead, Caravaggio gives us something far more uncomfortable. A system. The executioner stands at the center of the action. Not St. John, not God, not salvation. The man holding the knife controls the entire scene. St. John is still alive. His body is twisted, his mouth slightly open. The execution is unfinished. Caravaggio forces us to witness the moment. Between life and death. This is not martyrdom as triumph. It is martyrdom as procedure. The blood flows slowly, not explosively. There is no drama in the movement. Only routine. The space surrounding the figures amplifies this feeling. The architecture is heavy. The walls are bare. The darkness feels institutional, almost bureaucratic. This is not a place of passion. It is a place designed for punishment. In the background, two prisoners watch the execution from behind iron bars. They lean forward, straining to see. Not out of horror. Out of familiarity. Violence here is not shocking. It is expected. Their presence tells us that this is not a single event. It is part of a system that repeats itself over and over again. Then there is Salome. Traditionally portrayed as seductive, cruel, or manipulative, Caravaggio strips her of drama. She does not smile. She does not hesitate. She does not react. She simply holds the golden platter. Her skin is pale, clean, almost luminous. She appears untouched by the violence unfolding in front of her. This contrast is intentional. Caravaggio presents her as a symbol of obedience, not desire, not cruelty. She is the instrument of the state. Beside her stands an older woman, often confused with Herodias, but her reaction tells a different story. She covers her ears, not her eyes. This is one of the most psychologically powerful gestures in the entire painting. Caravaggio is telling us that what truly terrifies her is not the image of violence. It is the sound, the choking breath, the gurgling blood, the final attempt to breathe. By covering her ears, she becomes a surrogate for the viewer. We are forced to imagine what we cannot hear. The painting becomes auditory, almost cinematic. Caravaggio breaks the barrier between the canvas and the observer. Are no longer looking at violence. You are inside it. Even the emptiness of the space contributes to this effect. The composition feels open, yet claustrophobic, silent yet deafening. Every figure is isolated. There is no connection, no shared emotion. This is violence without empathy, a world where suffering happens in silence and continues without consequence. And this is where the painting stops being historical, because Caravaggio is not showing us the past. He is showing us how power works. He controlled the courts. He controlled the prisons. He controlled life and death. There were no appeals, no negotiations. Once a judgment was delivered, it was final. This culture of uncompromising justice shaped everything on the island, including its art. Ironically, this environment of violence and control made Malta the perfect refuge for a man like Caravagio. By 1607. Caravaggio was one of the most famous painters in Europe, but he was also one of the most dangerous men to be around. In Rome, he had lived a life of constant conflict, brawls, arrests, duels. That life finally caught up with him when he killed Ranuccio Tomassoni during an illegal duel. Dueling was forbidden in the Papal States. The punishment was death. Caravaggio fled Rome as a condemned man. He was sentenced in absentia, meaning anyone could legally kill him. All that was required was proof, his severed head. Every shadow was a threat. Every stranger was a potential executioner. Caravaggio's survival now depended entirely on political protection. This is where Malta enters the story. The Grand Master of the Knights, Olaf de Wignacourt, immediately recognized the opportunity. Malta was powerful, but culturally isolated. It lacked prestige. It lacked influence in the artistic world. Caravaggio could change that dot by bringing Europe's most notorious painter to the island. Wignacourt could transform Malta's image. A military outpost could become a cultural stronghold. A remote island could become a destination. For Caravaggio, the deal was even more desperate. If he could become a knight, he would gain status that extended beyond Malta. Knighthood offered honor, protection, and most importantly, a possible path to papal forgiveness. The plan was simple and dangerous. Caravaggio would serve the knights through his art. In return, the knights would protect him. And if everything went perfectly, Rome might one day pardon him. But Malta was not a place of mercy. It was a place of rules. And once those rules were broken, there was no escape. This uneasy alliance between a violent artist and a violent institution would soon be tested, and it would all come down to one painting. And now we reach the most unsettling moment of this entire story. Because the beheading of St. John the Baptist is not just a depiction of violence. It is a confession. If you stand in front of the painting and look carefully at the blood flowing from St. John's neck, you will notice something almost impossible to see at first glance. Hidden within the dark red stain, Caravaggio wrote his name, F. Michelangelo. This is the only painting he ever signed, and he did not sign it proudly in a corner. He did not carve it into stone. He did not place it on a scroll or a banner. He embedded his identity inside a wound. The letter F stands for Fra Brother, a title used by members of religious orders. By signing himself as Brother Michelangelo, Caravaggio was declaring submission, humility, and repentance. But this was not a public declaration. It was meant to remain invisible. For centuries, no one noticed it. The signature was only discovered during a careful restoration, when layers of dirt and darkness were removed. Caravaggio wanted this confession to exist, but not to be seen. And that makes it even more disturbing. This was not an act of vanity. It was an act of desperation. At this point in his life, Caravaggio was a man officially marked for death, a fugitive, a murderer, a sinner without sanctuary. And here, in front of the most powerful religious order on the island, he places his own name in the blood of a martyr. This gesture carries a heavy theological meaning. In Christian doctrine, martyrdom is known as the baptism of blood, a death so pure that it cleanses the soul completely. By merging his name with St. John's blood, Caravaggio symbolically inserts himself into that act of purification. It is as if he is saying, my blood should be here. My death should be this one. Let this sacrifice count for me. This painting becomes more than an artwork. It becomes a legal document, a spiritual plea, a silent negotiation. Caravaggio transforms the canvas into a courtroom. The executioner becomes the state. St. John becomes the innocent victim. And the blood, bearing Caravaggio's name, becomes evidence. He is both criminal and penitent, both executioner and condemned. Even more disturbing is how calmly this confession is presented. There is no emotional outburst, no dramatic gesture, no visual emphasis. The signature blends into the violence as if it belongs there. As if Caravaggio believed that blood was the only honest place his name could exist. For a brief moment, the gamble worked. The knights accepted the painting. They admired it. They elevated him. Caravaggio was knighted. He had achieved what he wanted: status, protection, and the illusion of redemption. But redemption earned through fear is never stable, and Caravaggio had not escaped himself. For a brief moment, it seemed like Caravaggio had won. He had painted his masterpiece. He had been knighted. His name, written in blood, had opened the doors of power. But redemption built on violence never lasts. Shortly after completing the beheading of St. John the Baptist, Caravaggio was involved in yet another violent incident. This time, the victim was not a stranger god. It was a fellow knight. The response was immediate. Caravaggio was imprisoned in the Goa, a deep underground cell reserved for the most serious offenders. A place designed not just to confine the body, but to erase a reputation. No one had ever escaped from the Goa. Caravaggio did. How he escaped remains unclear. Some say he had help from inside. Others believe it was sheer desperation. What matters is the result. His escape humiliated the Knights of Malta. The man who had painted their most powerful image had become their greatest embarrassment. He was stripped of his title, formally expelled from the order, declared a fugitive once again. From that moment on, Caravaggio lived like a hunted man. He fled to Sicily, then to Naples, painting obsessively, relentlessly. His later works grow darker, more violent, more fragmented. It is as if he knew time was running out. Ironically, the pardon he had been seeking all along was finally within reach. Rome was ready to forgive him, but Caravaggio never made it back. He died on the journey, alone, exhausted, still marked by the violence that had defined his life. Today, the beheading of St. John the Baptist still hangs in Malta. Silent, heavy, unresolved. It is not a painting about faith. It is not a painting about salvation. It is a painting about what happens when genius and violence coexist. About a man who tried to rewrite his destiny with art, and almost succeeded. And that is why this painting still disturbs us, because it asks a question we are still unable to answer. Can art redeem a life? Or does it simply reveal who we truly are? If this video changed the way you see art, history, or human nature, subscribe to Hidden Intellects for more deep analyses like this. If you found value in this breakdown, like the video. It helps the channel reach more curious minds. And tell us in the comments, do you think Caravaggio was seeking forgiveness? Or trying to justify his own violence? Your interpretation adds another layer to the meaning, and that is where the real conversation begins.